They say a single act of kindness can change your life forever, but Luke Carter never believed it, until the night he pulled a dying stranger from a blizzard and discovered she was the most powerful woman in Montana territory. What started as a desperate rescue in freezing darkness became a journey that would transform a poor cowboy and his son from having nothing to inheriting everything. But before we get to that golden ending, you need to hear how it all began. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled across the world. The Montana Territory had a way of breaking men. It broke them slowly, methodically, the way a river wears down stone, through relentless, cold, unforgiving land and the kind of loneliness that settled into your bones like frost. Luke Carter knew this better than most. At 32, he looked 40, his hands scarred from barbed wire and hard labor, his face weathered by wind that cut like razors across the high plains. He'd lost his wife Sarah to fever 3 years back, lost the small ranch to debt 2 years after that, and now all he had left in this world was his 7-year-old son Eli and a horse so old it should have been put out to pasture seasons ago. But the horse was loyal, and loyalty meant something out here where most things, people, promises, hope, proved temporary as morning frost. It was the 3rd week of February, 1887, and the winter had been brutal even by Montana standards. Luke had spent the last month working odd jobs in the mining camps north of Copper Ridge, saving every dollar, sleeping in stables, eating 1 meal a day so Eli could have 2. The boy never complained, not once, though Luke saw the hunger in his eyes, the way his clothes hung loose on his small frame. "We're going home, son," Luke had told him that morning, which wasn't quite true because they didn't have a home anymore. Just a one-room cabin Luke had built with his own hands on a patch of land so remote and worthless that the bank hadn't bothered to claim it. But it was theirs, in the way that anything could belong to a man who had nothing, and it was better than the cold floors of mining camp stables. They'd left at dawn, hoping to make the 60-mile journey before nightfall. Luke knew the risk. February in Montana was like playing cards with death, the stakes always too high, the odds never in your favor. But he'd made the calculation that living men make when they're desperate. They needed to get back, to rest, to start over once more. Spring was coming. There'd be work. There had to be work. The sky had been clear when they started, a pale blue that stretched forever, the kind of sky that made you believe in possibility. Eli rode behind him, his small arms wrapped around Luke's waist, chattering about a dog he'd seen in the mining camp, how maybe they could get a dog come spring, how he'd name it Thunder, or maybe Bear, or maybe just Dog, because that was a good name too, wasn't it, Pa? Luke had smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "Sure, son, come spring, we'll see about a dog." But Montana Territory had other plans. The storm came out of nowhere, the way they sometimes did in these mountains. A wall of white that swallowed the sky, turned day to twilight, then twilight to darkness so complete you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. The wind rose from whisper to scream in minutes, carrying snow that felt like needles against exposed skin. "Pa!" Eli's voice was small, frightened, barely audible over the howling wind. "Hold tight, son. Don't let go." Luke hunched forward, trying to shield the boy with his own body, but the cold was everywhere, invasive, stealing the warmth from his lungs with every breath. The trail, what passed for a trail, had vanished beneath the snow. Luke was navigating by instinct now, by the feel of the land beneath his horse's hooves, by memory of a route he'd traveled dozens of times. But memory meant nothing when you couldn't see. Memory couldn't stop the cold that was seeping through their coats, their boots, turning fingers numb, making Eli's grip weaken. "Keep talking to me, Eli. Tell me about that dog." "I'm cold, Pa." The boy's teeth were chattering so hard Luke could feel it through his coat. "I know, son, I know, but we're almost there, almost home." It was a lie, and they both knew it. They were nowhere near home. They were lost in a blizzard that was trying to kill them, and Luke's old horse was starting to stumble, exhausted, confused, as blind as they were. Luke's mind raced through options, each one worse than the last. Keep riding and risk the horse going down, maybe stepping into a ravine they couldn't see, killing them all. Stop and try to wait it out, but waiting meant freezing, meant Eli dying slowly in his arms, push forward toward where home should be, but if his navigation was off even by a mile, they could ride past it and never know, could ride until they dropped. He chose forward, always forward, because stopping was giving up, and Luke Carter had never learned how to do that. Time lost meaning in the white void. Minutes or hours. Luke couldn't tell anymore. His face had gone numb. His hands were frozen claws gripping the reins, and Eli had stopped talking, which terrified Luke more than anything. The boy's arms were still around his waist, but the grip was weak, too weak. Eli, talk to me. Tired, Pa. No, don't you dare fall asleep. Eli Carter, you listen to me. You stay awake, you hear me? That's an order. Okay, Pa. But the voice was fading, and Luke felt panic rising in his chest like bile. His son was dying. They were both dying, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it except keep riding through endless white until the cold claimed them both. That's when he saw it. At first, he thought it was a hallucination, the kind desperate men see when they're close to the end. A dark shape materializing out of the swirling snow, solid, real, impossible. Luke blinked hard, ice cracking around his eyelashes. No, it was still there. Something on the trail ahead, maybe 50 feet, maybe less. His horse had seen it too, and animals know things men don't. The old gelding pushed forward with renewed energy, drawn to the shape the way dying men are drawn to light. As they got closer, Luke's heart sank. It was a horse, a beautiful bay mare, far too fine an animal for these parts, lying on its side in the snow. Dead or dying, he couldn't tell, but either way it meant someone else had been caught in the storm. Then he saw her. She was lying half buried in a snowdrift beside the fallen horse, one arm stretched out as if reaching for something, her dark coat already white with accumulating snow. Luke didn't think. Thinking was for men who had time, and time was something he didn't have. He slid off his horse, his legs nearly buckling when they hit the ground, and stumbled through the knee-deep snow to where she lay. Ma'am, can you hear me? No response. Her face was pale, her lips blue, her eyes closed. Luke ripped off his glove, immediately regretting it as the cold bit his hand, and pressed his fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse. For a terrible moment he felt nothing, and then, there, faint, slow. But there, she was alive. Eli, I need you to be strong right now. Luke looked back at his son, who was slumped in the saddle, barely conscious himself. I know you're tired, but I need you to stay awake a little longer. Can you do that for me? The boy nodded weakly. Luke hooked his arms under the woman's shoulders and dragged her from the snowdrift. She was dead weight, unconscious, but she was small, couldn't weigh more than 120 pounds soaking wet. He looked at her horse. The mare was still breathing, its sides heaving, but it wasn't getting up. He couldn't save them both. Hell, he probably couldn't save any of them, but he was damn well going to try. Making a decision that felt both insane and inevitable, Luke lifted the woman and carried her to his horse. The old gelding stood steady, bless its loyal heart, as Luke somehow maneuvered the unconscious woman onto the saddle in front of Eli. Hold her, son. Put your arms around her and hold on. Can you do that? Yes, Pa. Luke took the woman's frozen hands. She wasn't wearing gloves, he realized with horror, which meant she'd been out here even longer than he thought, and wrapped them around the saddle horn, then positioned Eli behind her so the boy could keep her from falling. Don't let go, either of you. You understand? Don't let go. He grabbed the reins and started walking, leading the horse through the blizzard. He couldn't ride now, there wasn't room, and the old horse was already carrying more weight than it should. So Luke walked, head down against the wind, each step a battle, each breath a knife of cold in his lungs. The woman's mare whinnied behind them, a sound of distress that cut through the wind. Luke didn't look back. Couldn't look back. He'd made his choice. Time dissolved again. Luke's world narrowed to the next step, then the next, his boots breaking through the snow crust, his legs burning with effort. He couldn't feel his face anymore, couldn't feel his hands or feet. His whole existence had become this. Walk, breathe, don't stop, never stop, because stopping is dying. Pa! Eli's voice stronger now, urgent. Pa, I see something. Luke looked up, forcing his eyes to focus through the snow and darkness. There, a darker shape against the white, angular, solid. His cabin. They'd made it. By some miracle, by blind luck or divine intervention, or the simple stubborn refusal to die, they'd made it. The last 100 yards took everything Luke had left. His vision was tunneling, his legs moving on pure will, and when he finally reached the cabin door, he almost wept with relief. Almost, but Luke Carter didn't weep, not when his wife died, not when he lost the ranch, not now. There'd be time for that later. Maybe. He pulled open the door, thank God he never locked it, because his hands couldn't have managed a key, and led the horse right into the one-room cabin. It was something he'd done a few times in the worst storms, and the old gelding knew the drill. Once inside, out of the wind, Luke finally let himself stop. His legs gave out. He collapsed against the wall, gasping, shaking, alive. "Eli, you okay, son?" Cold, Pa. So cold. "I know. I'm gonna fix that. Just give me a minute." But he didn't have a minute. The woman was still unconscious, and Eli was dangerously close to hypothermia. Luke forced himself back to his feet, his muscles screaming in protest, and got to work. First, Eli. He pulled the boy off the horse, stripped off his wet clothes with shaking hands, and wrapped him in dry blankets from the bed. "Get under the covers, son. All the way under. I need to start a fire." The cabin was freezing, not much warmer than outside, but at least they were out of the wind. Luke's hands were so numb he could barely grip the matches, and the first 3 snapped before he finally got one lit. He held it to the kindling in the fireplace, whispering prayers he wasn't sure he believed in, and when the flame caught, when the kindling started to burn, he added larger pieces of wood with the careful precision of a man who knows this fire is the difference between life and death. The flames grew. Heat began to radiate into the room, beautiful, precious heat. Next, the woman. Luke returned to his horse and carefully lifted her down. She was completely limp, barely breathing, her skin ice cold to the touch. He carried her to the other side of the room. The cabin wasn't big enough for modesty, and began the delicate work of trying to save her life. Her coat came off first, heavy with melted snow and ice. Then her boots. Expensive leather, he noticed distantly, the kind that cost more than he made in a month. Her clothes were soaked through. Luke hesitated for only a moment before stripping them off, keeping his eyes carefully averted, focused on the task, not the woman. This was about survival, nothing more. He wrapped her in every blanket he could spare, rubbing her arms and legs to stimulate circulation, the way he'd learned to do with lambs born in cold weather. Her skin was waxy, pale, and for a terrifying moment he thought he'd lost her. Then she gasped, a small desperate sound, and started shivering violently. "That's it," Luke murmured, still rubbing her arms. "That's good. Shivering means you're fighting. Keep fighting, ma'am." He carried her closer to the fire, positioning her where she'd get the most heat without being too close to the flames. Then he did the same for Eli, bringing the boy next to the fire, keeping them both warm. Only then did Luke tend to his horse. The old gelding stood patiently, snow melting off its coat, creating puddles on the wooden floor. Luke removed the saddle and bridle, rubbed the horse down with a piece of sacking, and gave it the last of the oats from his saddlebag. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Thank you, old friend," Luke whispered, pressing his forehead against the horse's neck. "You saved us all today." The horse nickered softly, and Luke felt his throat tighten with emotion. This animal had carried 3 people through a killer blizzard, had kept going when any other horse would have quit, and had asked for nothing in return but a little oats and a kind word. Finally, Luke allowed himself to collapse. He sat on the floor between Eli and the woman, feeding wood into the fire, watching the flames dance, feeling sensation slowly, painfully return to his extremities. His hands began to hurt as they thawed, a burning, stinging pain that made him grit his teeth. His feet felt like they were being stabbed with hot needles. But pain meant he still had his fingers and toes, so he welcomed it. Hours passed. The storm continued to rage outside, the wind howling around the cabin like a living thing, but inside the fire burned bright and warm. Luke dozed sitting up, jerking awake every few minutes to check on Eli and the woman, to add wood to the fire, to make sure they were all still breathing. Eli slept fitfully, occasionally crying out in his sleep, calling for his mother. Luke would reach over and pat his shoulder, whisper soothing words, and the boy would settle again. The woman didn't wake. She shivered for hours, violent tremors that shook her whole body, and Luke worried about how much damage the cold had done. He'd seen men lose fingers and toes to frostbite, seen some lose their minds to exposure. Would she wake at all? And if she did, would she be the same person who'd been riding that fine horse before the storm hit? Night turned to deeper night. The blizzard showed no signs of stopping. Luke kept the fire burning, kept watch over his 2 charges, and somewhere in the deepest part of the night, exhaustion finally claimed him. His head drooped forward, his eyes closed, and he slept sitting up, his back against the rough wall, one hand still holding a piece of firewood. He dreamed of Sarah, his wife, her gentle smile and warm hands. In the dream, she was standing in a field of wildflowers, the sun shining on her dark hair, and she was saying something he couldn't quite hear. He tried to move closer, to hear her words, but the field stretched longer with each step, and she remained forever out of reach. When Luke woke, gray dawn light was filtering through the cabin's single window. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a world buried in white. For a moment, Luke simply sat there, disoriented, his body aching in ways he'd never experienced before. Then memory came flooding back, and he turned quickly to check on Eli. The boy was still asleep, but his color was better, his breathing steady. Luke reached over and felt his forehead, warm but not feverish. Relief washed over him. Then he looked at the woman. Her eyes were open. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Confusion, perhaps, or fear, or simply the blank incomprehension of someone who'd been to the edge of death and back. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "Easy now," Luke said softly, not wanting to startle her. "You're safe. You're in my cabin, up on Copper Ridge. I found you in the storm." She tried to speak again, and this time a whisper emerged, so faint he had to lean closer to hear. Where am I?" "Copper Ridge, ma'am. About 40 miles north of Three Forks. You were caught in the blizzard." Her brow furrowed, and she tried to sit up. Luke gently pressed her shoulder back down. "Don't try to move yet. You've been through a hell of an ordeal. Your body needs time." "My horse..." The words were clearer now, though still weak. Luke's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your horse went down in the storm. I couldn't save it, could barely save you." Her eyes closed, and Luke saw tears squeeze out from beneath her lids. She was a good horse." "I'm sure she was, ma'am. I'm truly sorry." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the soft whistle of Eli's breathing. Then the woman opened her eyes again and looked at Luke properly for the first time. He saw her take in his rough clothes, his worn boots, his scarred hands, saw her gaze move around the cabin, one room, barely furnished, poor in every way that mattered to most people. "You saved my life," she said quietly. Luke shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her voice. "Wouldn't be much of a man if I'd left you out there." Most would have. Most would have ridden right past, would have told themselves they couldn't spare the time or the risk. "Then most have forgotten what it means to be human," Luke said simply. She studied him for a long moment, and Luke had the unsettling feeling that she was seeing something in him he didn't see in himself. Then she spoke again. "What's your name?" "Luke Carter, ma'am, and that's my son Eli, sleeping there." She hesitated just for a fraction of a second. Clara Weston." "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Weston, though I wish the circumstances were better." "Mrs. Weston," she corrected softly. "I'm a widow." "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. I'm widowed myself. My Sarah passed 3 years back." Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, perhaps, of shared grief, shared understanding of what it meant to lose someone you loved. Clara's expression softened. "Then you understand," she said. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." Eli stirred then, making small sounds of waking, and Luke turned his attention to his son. "Hey there, little man. How you feeling?" Eli's eyes blinked open, and for a moment he looked confused. Then he saw the woman and his eyes went wide. "Pa, is she?" "She's alive, son. We all made it through the night. I was scared, Pa. The boy's voice was small, honest in the way only children can be. I thought we were going to die. I know you were scared, but you were brave too. You held on when I needed you to hold on. I'm proud of you, Eli. The boy beamed at the praise, then looked shyly at Clara. Are you okay, ma'am? Clara managed a small smile. I am now, thanks to you and your father. Pa says I can have a dog come spring. Does he now? Clara's smile widened. That sounds wonderful. If we can afford it, Luke added quickly, not wanting his son to get too excited about something that might not happen. Money was always tight, and a dog meant another mouth to feed. A boy should have a dog, Clara said quietly. Every boy should have a dog. Luke didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Instead, he got to his feet, his legs protesting, and went to the small pantry. His supplies were meager. Some cornmeal, a few strips of dried venison, half a loaf of bread that had seen better days. But it was food, and they needed to eat. I can make some Johnny cakes, he said, and there's coffee if you drink it. Coffee sounds like heaven, Clara said. As Luke worked, mixing the cornmeal with water from the bucket, heating the pan over the fire, brewing the coffee in a battered tin pot, he was aware of Clara watching him. It made him self-conscious, though he couldn't have said why. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, like she was trying to figure something out. Or maybe it was simply that he wasn't used to having anyone in his cabin besides Eli, and having a woman here, even an injured, stranded woman, felt strange, intimate in ways he hadn't experienced since Sarah died. The Johnny cakes were simple fare, just cornmeal, water, and a little salt cooked in bacon grease. But they smelled good, and Eli's face lit up at the sight of food. Luke helped Clara sit up, propping her against the wall with blankets behind her back, and gave her a plate and a cup of coffee. It's not much, he said apologetically. It's perfect, Clara replied, and the way she said it made Luke think she meant it. They ate in companionable silence, the three of them huddled near the fire while the world outside remained locked in white. When they'd finished, Luke collected the plates and set them aside to wash later. The storm's passed, he said, but there's got to be 3 feet of snow out there. We're stuck here for a few days at least until things settle and I can dig us out. I don't want to impose on your hospitality, Mr. Carter. You're not imposing, ma'am. You couldn't leave even if you wanted to. And please, call me Luke. Mr. Carter makes me sound like my father. Then you must call me Clara. Over the next 3 days, as the snow slowly settled and Luke worked to dig paths from the cabin, an unlikely friendship formed. Clara was not what Luke had expected. Despite her fine clothes and educated way of speaking, she insisted on helping around the cabin, peeling potatoes, mending Eli's torn shirt, sweeping the floor. She told stories that made Eli laugh, tales of far-off places Luke had only read about in old newspapers. But she was careful with her past. When Luke asked where she'd been traveling from, she said simply, "Business in Helena," and changed the subject. When he asked about her family, she said only that she had no children and her husband had died some years back. There was a sadness in her eyes when she spoke of it, a depth of grief that Luke recognized because he carried the same weight. On the second night, after Eli had fallen asleep, Clara and Luke sat by the fire and talked in low voices so as not to wake the boy. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. "Of course." "Why did you stop? In the storm, when you found me, you had your son with you. You were already in danger. Most men would have kept riding, would have told themselves they had to protect their own child first." Luke was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "I've thought about that," he finally said. "Wondered if I was crazy, if I risked Eli's life for a stranger. But the truth is, I didn't think about it at all. I saw you lying there, and I just did what needed doing." "But why?" Luke looked at her then, his eyes serious. "Because 3 years ago, when Sarah was dying of fever, a neighbor rode through a storm to bring the doctor. Didn't matter that the doctor couldn't save her. What mattered was that somebody tried. Somebody cared enough to risk something for us. I've never forgotten that. Never will. So when I saw you in the snow, I guess I was paying forward what was given to me." Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "The neighbor, did you ever repay him?" "Tried to. He wouldn't take anything, said that's just what neighbors do." Luke smiled slightly. Course, when his barn burned down the next year, I helped rebuild it, worked every evening for 2 months. He tried to pay me then, but I wouldn't take anything either. Why not? Because he was right. That's just what neighbors do. Clara wiped at her eyes. You're a good man, Luke Carter. I'm just a man, Clara. Nothing special about me. I disagree, she said softly. You're exactly what's special about this hard country. You remind people that decency still exists. On the third day, Luke managed to dig out the cabin door and assess the situation. The snow had drifted in places as high as the roof, but the main path was passable if they were careful. Clara's horse, the beautiful bay mare, had died in the storm. Luke found her frozen solid 20 yards from where he'd found Clara. He spent an hour digging a deep hole and burying her properly, because that seemed like the right thing to do. When he came back inside, Clara was standing at the window, wrapped in one of his coats, looking out at the endless white. I need to get back, she said. People will be worried. I understand, ma'am, Clara, but my horse can't carry 3 of us all the way to Three Forks, not through this snow. It'll take us a day just to make it to the main road, and then you can catch a stage. I don't want to be more trouble than I already have been. You haven't been any trouble, Luke said honestly. It's been nice, having someone else here. He immediately felt foolish for saying it, but Clara turned and smiled. It has been nice, she agreed. Your son is wonderful. You're raising him right. Trying to. It's hard doing it alone. It is, Clara said quietly, and Luke sensed there was more she wanted to say but didn't. They left the next morning, all 3 riding Luke's old horse through the snow-locked landscape. The journey was slow, exhausting, and by the time they reached the main road, Luke's horse was stumbling with fatigue, but they made it, and there was a stage due through that afternoon. As they waited at the small way station, Eli playing in the snow nearby, Clara turned to Luke. I'll never forget what you did, she said. You don't need to remember it, Luke replied. I'm just glad you're safe. I want to repay you somehow. Let me... No, ma'am, I don't want your money. Then at least let me replace your supplies. I took your food, your blankets. You didn't take anything. It was freely given. Clara looked frustrated. Luke, you're a proud man, and I respect that, but pride doesn't feed your son. Let me help. Luke's jaw tightened. She was right, and they both knew it. His pride had been the only thing keeping him going sometimes. But pride didn't buy cornmeal or firewood. Still, taking charity stuck in his throat like ground glass. I'll think about it, he said finally, which they both knew meant no. The stage arrived in a cloud of snow and steam, the horses snorting and stamping. Clara gathered her few belongings. Luke had retrieved what he could from her saddlebags and prepared to board. Eli ran over and threw his arms around her waist. Goodbye, Miss Clara. I hope you come back. Clara hugged him tight, and Luke saw her eyes were wet. Goodbye, Eli. You take care of your father, you hear? He's one of the good ones. I will. Then Clara turned to Luke. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, and Luke felt something pass between them. Recognition, respect, perhaps something more, though he couldn't have named it. Safe travels, Clara. Goodbye, Luke. She reached out and took his hand, squeezed it once. Thank you for everything. Then she climbed into the stage, the door closed, and the driver cracked his whip. The horses lunged forward, and the stage rolled away down the snow-packed road, growing smaller and smaller until it disappeared around a bend. Luke and Eli stood there for a long time, watching the empty road. Pa? Eli said finally. Yeah, son? Do you think we'll ever see her again? Luke looked down at his boy, at the hope in his young face, and he wanted to say yes, wanted to promise that Clara would come back. But Luke Carter didn't make promises he couldn't keep. I don't know, son. Probably not. She's got her own life, her own troubles. We were just a moment for her. Something that happened, and then she moved on. But she was nice, Pa. I liked her. I liked her too, Luke admitted. They walked back to where Luke's horse was tied and began the long journey back to the cabin. As they rode through the white landscape, Luke found himself thinking about Clara, the way she'd looked at him, the things she'd said, the softness in her voice when she talked about his kindness. He tried to push the thoughts away. She was gone, back to her life, and he had his own life to worry about. There was work to find, money to make, a son to raise. But sometimes, in the weeks that followed, Luke would find himself pausing in whatever he was doing, chopping wood or mending fence, or just staring at the fire at night. And he'd wonder where she was, if she was safe, if she ever thought about the poor cowboy who'd pulled her from a snowdrift and asked for nothing in return. He never expected to see her again. He had no way of knowing that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine, that one act of kindness on a frozen night was going to transform everything he thought he knew about the world and his place in it. The letter, when it came, would be a revelation. But that was still weeks away, and Luke Carter didn't know about any of it yet. He only knew that he'd done the right thing, had saved a life, and that had to be enough. It had to be. The weeks that followed were among the hardest Luke had ever known, and that was saying something for a man who'd already lost everything once. February melted into March, and with it came the false promise of spring, those few warm days that made you believe winter was finally done, before another storm rolled in to remind you that Montana didn't give up its grip so easily. Luke found work where he could. 3 days mending fence for the Patterson Ranch, payment in smoked ham and $1. A week hauling timber for the mill in Copper Ridge, his back screaming by sunset every day, $18 that disappeared as fast as he earned it, boots for Eli, whose feet had grown again, flour and beans and coffee, a new axe handle to replace the one that had cracked. The mathematics of poverty were simple and brutal. There was never enough, and what little you had went faster than you could replace it. But they survived. That's what Carters did. They survived. Eli went to school when he could, when the weather permitted and Luke didn't need him for chores. The boy was bright, his teacher said, smart as a whip and eager to learn. That gave Luke pride, the kind that swelled in his chest and made him stand a little straighter. His son wouldn't grow up ignorant, wouldn't be trapped by the limitations that had hemmed in Luke's own life. Maybe Eli would be something more than a day laborer scraping by on the margins. Maybe he'd have a real future. Sometimes, in the evening after Eli had gone to sleep, Luke would sit by the fire and think about Clara. He tried not to, told himself it was foolish, that she was just a woman he'd helped, nothing more. But the thoughts came anyway. He wondered where she was, what she was doing, wondered if she ever thought about those 3 days in his cabin, or if it had already faded to a distant memory, an unpleasant episode best forgotten. He never told anyone about her. When Eli mentioned Miss Clara to people in town, Luke would quickly change the subject. It felt private somehow, too personal to share with the gossips and busybodies who made up small-town society. Besides, what was there to tell? He'd helped a stranger, that was all. It was the 3rd week of March when everything changed. Luke was in town buying supplies, the bare minimum, counting out his precious dollars with the careful precision of a man who knew exactly how little he had, when young Tommy Patterson came running into the general store, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Carter! Mr. Carter! There's a man looking for you!" Luke looked up from the sack of cornmeal he'd been examining. A man? What man? Fancy fellow, wearing a black coat like he's going to a funeral. Got a horse that probably costs more than my pa's whole string. He's over at the saloon asking for Luke Carter. A cold feeling settled in Luke's stomach. Men in fancy coats meant trouble in his experience. Debt collectors, lawyers, people who brought bad news wrapped in official papers. Did he say what he wanted? No, sir, just that he needed to find Luke Carter urgent-like. Luke paid for his cornmeal and coffee, his mind racing through possibilities. He didn't owe anyone money. You couldn't owe money when nobody would lend to you in the first place. Maybe something had happened to a distant relative, but he didn't have any relatives. Not anymore. His parents were dead, his brother had gone west to California years ago and never written back. The saloon was dim and smelled of whiskey and tobacco smoke, even at noon. Luke wasn't much of a drinking man, couldn't afford to be, but he knew every man in the place by sight, except for one. The stranger sat at a corner table, and Tommy had been right. He looked like he was dressed for a funeral, all in black except for a crisp white shirt and a silver watch chain. He was maybe 50, with graying hair and shrewd eyes that assessed Luke the moment he walked through the door. "Mr. Carter?" The man stood, extending his hand. "My name is James Whitmore. I've been looking for you." Luke shook his hand warily, The man's grip was firm, his palms soft, the hand of someone who'd never done hard labor. "You found me. What's this about? Perhaps we could speak somewhere more private?" "This is fine," Luke said. He didn't trust this, didn't like the way Whitmore's eyes kept darting around the room, assessing exits and eavesdroppers. "Say what you came to say." Whitmore sighed and reached into his coat. Luke tensed, but the man only pulled out a sealed envelope, cream-colored paper with wax seal. "I've been instructed to deliver this to you personally, Mr. Carter." Luke took the envelope, turning it over in his hands. The paper was expensive, the kind that cost real money. The seal was dark red wax, stamped with an elaborate H. "Who's it from?" "Perhaps you should read it, sir." The whole saloon had gone quiet, every man watching this strange tableau unfold. Luke felt their eyes on him, felt the weight of their curiosity. His fingers found the edge of the seal and broke it, the wax cracking cleanly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once, covered in elegant handwriting. Luke read it once, quickly, not believing what he was seeing. Then he read it again, slower, his heart beginning to pound in his chest. "Dear Mr. Carter," it began, "you saved my life on Widow's Pass, and I have thought of little else in the weeks since. I was not entirely honest with you about who I am, and for that I apologize. My full name is Clara Weston Hayes. My late husband was William Hayes, and I am the owner of the Hayes Cattle Company, the largest cattle operation in the Montana Territory. I have spent these weeks since our parting thinking about what you did, about the kind of man who would risk his own life and his son's life to save a stranger in a blizzard. You asked for nothing. You expected nothing. And yet you gave everything. I'm expanding my operations north into the Copper Ridge region. I need a man I can trust to run the new ranch, someone with integrity, with knowledge of the land, with the kind of character that cannot be bought or taught. I believe you are that man. I am offering you the position of ranch manager. The salary is $120 per month, with housing for you and your son, schooling for Eli, and after 2 years of successful operation, a 10% partnership in the Copper Ridge Ranch. This is not charity, Mr. Carter. This is business. I need someone I can trust, and I believe you are that person. Mr. Whitmore has been authorized to discuss the details with you and to handle any questions you might have. I hope you will consider this offer seriously. I meant what I said that day. You reminded me that good still exists in this hard world. I would be honored to have you as a partner in this venture. With sincere regards, Clara Weston Hayes. Luke's hands were shaking. He read it a third time, then a fourth, certain he must be misunderstanding something. $120 a month. Housing, schooling for Eli, a partnership. It was impossible. It was more money than he'd ever dreamed of making. It was... Is this real? Luke heard his own voice as if from a great distance. Whitmore nodded. Very real, Mr. Carter. Mrs. Hayes was quite insistent that I find you and extend this offer. She spoke very highly of you. But I'm nobody. I'm just a cowboy who does odd jobs. I don't know anything about running a ranch. Mrs. Hayes seems to believe otherwise, and I've learned not to question her judgment. The woman has built the Hayes Cattle Company into the most successful operation in 3 territories. If she thinks you're the right man, then you probably are. Luke looked down at the letter again, at the elegant handwriting, at Clara's signature at the bottom. Clara Weston Hayes, owner of the Hayes Cattle Company. The woman he'd pulled from a snowdrift, who'd peeled potatoes in his cabin and mended his son's shirt, was one of the wealthiest people in Montana Territory. I don't understand, Luke said quietly. Why me? She could hire anyone, someone with experience, someone who knows what they're doing. Perhaps, Whitmore said. But could she trust them? Mrs. Hayes' husband died 5 years ago, Mr. Carter. Since then, she's had to deal with men who saw her as a target, men who tried to swindle her, to steal from her, to take advantage of a woman running a business in a man's world. She's learned to be careful about who she trusts. Very careful. And apparently she trusts you. The words hung in the air between them. Luke thought about Clara sitting by his fire, thought about the way she'd looked at him when he'd said he didn't want her money, when he'd refused payment for saving her life. He'd been honest with her in a way that had cost him nothing because honesty was all he had. But maybe, to someone in her position, that honesty was worth everything. "When would I start?" Luke heard himself ask, and was surprised by his own words. Part of him wanted to say no, wanted to refuse because taking this felt too much like charity, too much like being rescued. But another part, the part that thought about Eli's future, about finally having stability, about not spending every winter wondering if they'd freeze or starve, that part was already saying yes. As soon as possible, Mrs. Hayes is eager to begin operations before the spring cattle drive. There's a ranch house being built now, about 15 miles north of here. It should be ready in 2 weeks. In the meantime, she's arranged accommodations for you at the Copper Ridge Hotel, all expenses paid. The hotel? Luke almost laughed. He'd never stayed in a hotel in his life. "Mr. Whitmore, I appreciate the offer, but I can't just abandon my place, Your cabin?" Whitmore's expression was kind but firm. "Mr. Carter, I drove past your cabin on my way to find you. With respect, sir, you're living in a structure that's barely fit for livestock. Mrs. Hayes is offering you a real home, a real future, for yourself and your son." The words stung because they were true. Luke's pride wanted to argue, to defend his cabin and his choices, but he couldn't. The cabin was a hovel. He knew it. Everyone knew it. He'd been telling himself it was temporary, that things would get better, but years had passed and nothing had changed except that he and Eli had gotten thinner and more worn down. "I need to think about it," Luke said, though even as he spoke, he knew he'd already made his decision. "Of course, Mrs. Hayes anticipated you might need time. She asked me to tell you that the offer stands for 1 week. After that, she'll need to look elsewhere." Whitmore stood and pulled a card from his pocket, laying it on the table. "This is where you can reach me. I'll be staying at the hotel. Send word when you've decided." Luke took the card, feeling the weight of it, the reality of what was being offered. "Can I ask you something?" "Certainly. Is Mrs. Hayes a good person to work for?" Whitmore's expression softened. "I've worked for the Hayes family for 12 years, Mr. Carter. William Hayes was a hard man, but fair. When he died, everyone expected the business to fold within a year. Women don't run cattle companies, people said. She'll fail, they said. She'll sell out, they said." He paused. Not only did she not fail, she doubled the size of the operation. She treats her people fairly, pays them on time, and expects honest work in return. Is she demanding? Yes. Does she suffer fools? No. But is she good? I believe she is. I wouldn't have worked for her for 5 years if she weren't. After Whitmore left, Luke sat at that table for a long time, staring at the letter in his hands. The other men in the saloon had gone back to their drinks and their conversations, but he could feel their curiosity, could hear the whispers. Word would be all over town by nightfall. Luke Carter had gotten some kind of fancy offer from some fancy woman. Finally, he stood, carefully folded the letter, and put it in his coat pocket. He needed to get home, needed to talk to Eli. This decision affected them both. The ride back to the cabin seemed longer than usual, his mind spinning with possibilities and doubts. $120 a month. He could barely conceive of that much money. It was more than he'd made in the last 6 months combined. Eli could go to school every day, have books, have clothes that fit. They could eat meat more than once a week. They could have a future that didn't involve constant desperation. But was he capable of running a ranch? He knew cattle, knew horses, knew the land. But managing, dealing with accounts and payroll and all the things that came with running an operation. The thought terrified him. Then again, Clara believed he could do it. And for some reason that mattered to him more than his own doubts. Eli was playing outside when Luke arrived, building something with sticks and stones, his imagination turning debris into castles. He looked up when he heard the horse, his face lighting up. "Pa, you're back. Did you bring peppermints?" "Not today, son. Come inside. I need to talk to you about something." The boy's smile faded, replaced by worry. At 7 years old, Eli had already learned that serious talks usually meant bad news. They went into the cabin and Luke built up the fire, more for something to do with his hands than because they needed the warmth. "Remember Miss Clara?" Luke began. Eli's face brightened. "Yes, is she okay? Did you hear from her?" "I did." Luke pulled out the letter. "Turns out Miss Clara isn't exactly who we thought she was. Her real name is Clara Weston Hayes, and she owns the biggest ranch in the Montana Territory." "Really?" Eli's eyes went wide. "She's rich?" "Very rich. And she's offered me a job, son. A real job, running a new ranch she's building near here. It comes with a house and a good salary and schooling for you every day." "Would we leave our cabin?" Eli looked around at the rough walls, the single room that was all he'd ever known. "Yes, we would." "Would we have our own rooms, like in a real house?" Luke felt his throat tighten. His son was 7 years old and had never had his own room, had never lived anywhere but this drafty cabin. "Yes, son. You'd have your own room." Eli was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Would we get that dog?" Despite everything, Luke smiled. "I think we probably could, yeah." "Then we should do it, Pa. We should say yes." "It's not that simple, Eli. This is a big change, and I'm not sure I can do it. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough?" Eli came over and put his small hand on Luke's arm. "Miss Clara thinks you're good enough. She wouldn't have asked you if she didn't think so. And Pa, I think you can do anything." The simple faith in his son's voice broke something in Luke's chest. He pulled Eli into a hug, holding him tight, this boy who'd lost his mother and his home, but still believed his father could do anything. "All right," Luke whispered. "All right, we'll do it. We'll say yes." The next 3 days were a whirlwind. Luke rode back to town and accepted the offer, shaking Whitmore's hand while feeling like he was in a dream. The lawyer produced papers, a contract that Luke read 3 times before signing, making sure there were no hidden clauses, no traps. But it was straightforward. $120 a month, housing, schooling for Eli, and after 2 years of successful operation, a 10% stake in the Copper Ridge Ranch. "Mrs. Hayes has arranged for you to visit the main Hayes Ranch before you start," Whitmore explained. "She wants you to see the operation, understand how she runs things. You'll spend a week there, learning the systems. Your son can accompany you. There's a school on the property for the workers' children." A week at the Hayes Ranch. Luke felt simultaneously excited and terrified. He'd be meeting Clara again, but this time as her employee, not as the man who'd saved her life. The dynamic had shifted entirely. They packed what little they owned, it fit in 2 bags and a trunk, and left the cabin behind. Luke didn't look back. He'd learned long ago that looking back only made leaving harder, and this was a leaving he needed to make cleanly. The Hayes Ranch was a day's ride south, and as they approached it, Luke felt his stomach drop. He'd known it would be big, the biggest in the territory, everyone said, but he hadn't been prepared for this. The main house was 3 stories of white-painted wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Behind it stretched barns, corrals, bunkhouses, equipment sheds, a small town unto itself. Cattle dotted the hills as far as Luke could see, thousands of head, maybe tens of thousands. "Pa," Eli breathed, "it's like a castle." "It's a ranch, son, just bigger than what we're used to." But even as he said it, Luke felt out of place, like he'd made a terrible mistake. He was a nobody from a nowhere place, about to meet with one of the most powerful women in the territory. What had he been thinking? They were met at the main house by a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "You must be Mr. Carter and young Eli. I'm Mrs. Patterson, the house manager. Mrs. Hayes is expecting you. She's in her office." Luke followed Mrs. Patterson through the house, trying not to gawk at the polished wood floors, the real glass windows, the furniture that looked like it had come from back east. This was wealth on a scale he'd never encountered. Eli's hand gripped his tightly, the boy's eyes wide with wonder. Mrs. Patterson knocked on a heavy oak door. "Mrs. Hayes, Mr. Carter is here." "Send him in." The voice was Clara's, but with an edge of authority Luke hadn't heard before. He took a deep breath, squeezed Eli's hand, and entered. The office was spacious but not ostentatious, lined with bookshelves and maps of the territory. Behind a large desk sat Clara, dressed in a dark green riding outfit, her hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up when they entered, and for just a moment Luke saw surprise flicker across her face, as if she'd forgotten what he looked like. Then she smiled, and she was the woman from his cabin again, warm and real. "Luke, Eli, welcome to the Hayes Ranch." She stood and came around the desk, and Luke saw that she moved with confidence here, with the assurance of someone on their own ground. "I'm so glad you accepted my offer." "Thank you for making it, ma'am." Luke felt suddenly awkward, unsure how to act. Should he shake her hand? Bow? What was the protocol when the woman you'd rescued turned out to be your new employer? Clara seemed to sense his discomfort. She knelt down to Eli's level. "Hello, Eli. Do you remember me?" "Yes, ma'am. You're Miss Clara. Pa says you're very rich now." Clara laughed, a genuine sound that eased some of Luke's tension. "Well, I was rich before too, Eli. I just didn't mention it. Mrs. Patterson is going to show you to your room and then take you to see the horses. Would you like that?" "Can I, Pa?" "Go ahead, son." After Eli left with Mrs. Patterson, Clara gestured to a chair. "Please sit. Would you like coffee? Something stronger?" "Coffee's fine, thank you." She poured from a silver pot, real silver, Luke noted, and handed him a cup. Then she sat across from him, not behind her desk, but in the chair beside his, and suddenly they were just two people again, not employer and employee. "I imagine you have questions," Clara said. "A few hundred, yeah." Luke took a sip of the coffee. It was better than anything he'd ever tasted. "Why me, Clara? And please, be honest. I need to understand what I'm getting into." Clara was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "After William died, I was left with a choice. I could sell the ranch. Plenty of men wanted to buy it. Or I could try to run it myself. Everyone told me to sell. Women don't run cattle companies, they said. You'll fail, they said. It was humiliating the way people looked at me like I was a child playing at business. But you didn't fail." "No, I didn't. But it was hard, Luke, so hard. I had to be twice as smart, twice as tough, twice as careful as any man would have been. I had to prove myself every single day. And in the process, I learned something important. I learned that most people can't be trusted. Men saw me as a target, as an opportunity. They tried to cheat me, to steal from me, to manipulate me. I became suspicious of everyone." She paused, looking out the window at her land. "Then I got caught in that blizzard. I was riding back from Helena after a particularly brutal business meeting, angry and frustrated, not paying attention to the weather. By the time I realized how bad the storm was, it was too late. My horse went down, and I thought I was going to die out there. And then you found me. You would have done the same for me." "Would I?" Clara looked at him, her eyes searching. "I'd like to think so, but I'm not sure anymore. I've become so hardened, so focused on protecting myself and my business. But you, Luke, you didn't hesitate. You risked your life and your son's life for a stranger. You took me into your home, gave me your food, your warmth, your kindness, and when I wanted to repay you, you refused. You expected nothing from me. I didn't know who you were." "That's exactly my point. You didn't know who I was, so there was no angle for you, no opportunity to exploit. You were just decent, just human, and that's so rare, Luke, so incredibly rare in my world." She leaned forward, intense. "I need someone I can trust absolutely, someone who won't steal from me, won't cheat me, won't see me as a mark. I need someone with integrity, and you proved you have that." Luke absorbed this, understanding dawning. "So this is about trust." "This is about trust," Clara confirmed. "But it's also about ability. I've made inquiries about you, Luke. People in Copper Ridge speak well of you, say you're a hard worker, that you know cattle and horses, that you're smart even if you've never had much schooling. You have the skills. What you don't have is experience managing, and that's what this week is for. I'm going to teach you how I run things, and then you're going to take that knowledge north and build something with it. And if I fail, then you fail, and we figure out what to do next. But I don't think you will." Clara smiled slightly. "You're more capable than you give yourself credit for, Luke Carter. You just need someone to give you a chance to prove it." They talked for hours that first day, Clara laying out her vision for the Copper Ridge Ranch, explaining the cattle business in detail Luke had never considered. She showed him ledgers, taught him how to read profit and loss statements, explained markets and pricing, and the 100 small decisions that went into running a successful operation. Luke's head spun with information, but he absorbed it, asked questions, took notes on paper Clara provided. He'd never been afraid of hard work, and learning was just another kind of work. Over the next week, Clara took Luke through every aspect of the ranch. They rode out to check cattle, inspected barns and equipment, reviewed hiring practices and payroll. Clara introduced him to her foreman, a grizzled man named Jenkins, who looked skeptical at first but warmed up when he saw Luke knew his way around horses. "You ever run a crew, Carter?" Jenkins asked. "No, sir, but I've worked on them." "That's something, at least. Mrs. Hayes says you're solid, and her judgment's usually good. Just remember, managing men is different than working alongside them. You gotta be firm but fair, and you gotta know when to push and when to back off." "I'll do my best." That's all any of us can do. In the evenings, after Eli had gone to bed in the guest room that was bigger than their entire cabin had been, Luke and Clara would sit in her office and talk. Sometimes about business, sometimes about other things. Their lives, their losses, their hopes for the future. "Do you ever get lonely?" Luke asked one night. "Running all this by yourself?" Clara considered the question. "Every day," she admitted. "William and I built this together. When he died, I lost my partner in every sense. I have employees, I have business associates, but I don't have connection. Real connection. People either want something from me or they're intimidated by me. It's exhausting." "I'm not intimidated by you," Luke said. "I know. That's one of the things I like about you." Clara smiled. "You see me as a person, not as the owner of the Hayes Cattle Company. Do you know how rare that is?" "I imagine it's pretty rare." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Luke found himself thinking dangerous thoughts. Thoughts about how easy it was to talk to Clara, how much he enjoyed her company, how the loss in her eyes matched the loss in his own. But he pushed those thoughts away. She was his employer. This was business. Anything else would be inappropriate and foolish. On the last day of his training, Clara took Luke to a hill overlooking the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in oranges and purples, and the land stretched out below them like a promise. "This is what I want you to build at Copper Ridge," Clara said. "Not just a ranch, but a legacy. Something that will last, that will matter. Can you do that, Luke?" Luke looked out at the land, at the cattle and the buildings, and all the evidence of hard work and vision. A month ago, he'd been a nobody with nothing, living in a cabin with his son, scraping by day to day. Now he was being asked to build something that would outlast them all. It was terrifying. It was exciting. It was the chance he'd been waiting for his whole life without knowing he was waiting. "I can do it," Luke said, and meant it. "I won't let you down, Clara." She looked at him, and in the fading light he saw something in her expression he couldn't quite name. Trust, maybe, or hope, or something more complex that neither of them was ready to acknowledge. "I know you won't," she said softly. "That's why I chose you." The Copper Ridge Ranch house was still being finished when Luke and Eli arrived 2 weeks later, but it was already more home than anything Luke had ever known. 2 stories of solid timber and stone, with a wide porch that caught the morning sun and 4 bedrooms upstairs. 4 bedrooms for just the 2 of them, plus space for the small crew Luke would be hiring. There was a real kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a dining room with a table that could seat 10, and a study where Luke could keep the ranch records. The floors were smooth planks instead of rough-cut boards. The windows had real glass, and there was a stone fireplace big enough to stand in. Eli ran through the empty rooms like he'd been given wings, his footsteps echoing off the bare walls, his laughter filling the space. Pa, come see. My room has 2 windows, 2! Luke stood in the doorway of what would be his own room and felt something tight in his chest loosen. The window looked out over rolling hills already dotted with the first of the cattle that had been driven up from the main ranch. His land now. Not owned, not yet, but his to manage, his to build into something that mattered. The responsibility of it should have terrified him, but instead he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. "What do you think, son?" Luke called down the stairs. Eli appeared at the bottom, his face flushed with excitement. "I think it's the best house in the whole world, Pa. Do you think Ma would have liked it?" The question caught Luke off guard. Eli rarely mentioned his mother anymore, and when he did, it was usually with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who'd learned early that some losses couldn't be fixed. But now, in this new place, with this new beginning, Sarah's absence felt both more distant and more immediate. "Your Ma would have loved it," Luke said, his voice rough. "She always wanted a real home for us. She'd be happy knowing you've got your own room with 2 windows. I'm going to put my bed right between them so I can see out both sides. That sounds like a good plan. The furniture arrived the next day, delivered by wagon from Three Forks. Beds and chairs and tables, all new, all paid for by Clara as part of the arrangement. Luke had protested, said he could make do with what little he had, but Clara had been firm. You're representing the Hayes Cattle Company now, Luke. The house needs to look the part, and so do you. She'd also sent clothes, which Luke had protested even more strongly, but Clara had overruled him. Consider it a uniform, she'd said. Would you argue if a general gave you boots? So now Luke had 3 new shirts, 2 pairs of good pants, a proper coat, and boots that didn't have holes worn through the soles. Eli got clothes too, enough that he'd have something clean to wear every day to the school Clara had arranged in town. By the end of the first week, the house felt lived in. Luke hired his first 3 hands, young men he knew from around Copper Ridge, hard workers who needed steady employment. There was Tom Fletcher, barely 20 but good with horses. Bobby Chen, whose parents had come from China to work the mines and who knew cattle better than anyone Luke had met. And old Pete Morrison, who'd worked ranches all his life and could teach Luke things no amount of training at the main ranch could have covered. You sure about this, boss? Pete asked on that first day, squinting at Luke from beneath a battered hat. Running a ranch for Mrs. Hayes? That's a lot of pressure for a man who's never managed before. I'm sure I'm going to try, Luke said, and I'm sure I'm going to need help from men who know more than I do. That's why I hired you, Pete. I need someone who will tell me when I'm about to make a mistake. Pete grunted, but Luke saw approval in the old man's eyes. Fair enough. Just don't expect me to sugarcoat it when you're being a damn fool. Wouldn't want you to. The work was hard but satisfying in ways Luke's previous jobs had never been. He wasn't just working for someone else's dream anymore. He was building his own. Every fence line he ran, every head of cattle he counted, every decision he made about grazing rotations or equipment purchases, it all mattered in a way that went beyond the daily wage. This was his operation to succeed or fail, and that knowledge drove him from dawn until well past dark every day. Clara visited once a week, riding up from the main ranch to check on progress. She'd inspect the books, review Luke's decisions, offer suggestions, and occasionally corrections. She was demanding but fair, pushing him to think bigger, to plan further ahead, to see the operation as part of the larger Hayes empire rather than just an isolated ranch. You're doing well, she told him one evening in early May, sitting in his study as Luke went over the month's expenses. Better than I expected, honestly. The men respect you, the operation is running smoothly, and you're under budget. Pete deserves most of the credit, Luke said. He knows things I'm still learning. But you're listening to him, which is smart. Some men would be too proud to take advice from their employees. Clara paused, her pen hovering over the ledger. There's something I want to discuss with you. The main ranch is hosting a gathering next month. Business associates, other ranchers, people I need to maintain relationships with. I'd like you to attend. Luke felt his stomach drop. I'm not really the social type, Clara. I know. But you're my partner now, Luke, or you will be in another year and a half. People need to see you, need to understand that you speak with my authority. Besides, she smiled slightly, I could use someone there who doesn't want anything from me. Someone I can actually talk to. What about your other managers? Surely Jenkins. Jenkins is excellent at running cattle operations, but he has the social graces of a fence post. You, on the other hand, have something better than manners. You have integrity. People can sense that. She looked at him directly. Please, Luke. I'm asking as a friend, not just as your employer. The word friend hung between them, meaning more than either was quite willing to acknowledge. Luke thought about his comfortable solitude, about how much easier it was to focus on work than on the complicated emotions that surfaced whenever Clara was around. But he also thought about what she'd said that first day at the main ranch, about being lonely, about having business associates but not connections. All right, he said, I'll come. But I'm warning you, I don't know which fork to use at a fancy dinner, and I'm likely to say the wrong thing to some important person. I'll take that risk. Clara's smile was genuine, warm in a way that made Luke's heart beat faster than it should. Thank you, Luke. After she left, riding back toward the main ranch in the fading light, Luke stood on his porch and watched until she disappeared over the ridge. Eli came out and stood beside him, leaning against Luke's side the way he'd done since he was small enough to fit entirely under Luke's arm. "You like Miss Clara, don't you, Pa?" Luke looked down at his son, surprised by the observation. "She's my employer, Eli. Of course I like her. She gave us this opportunity." "That's not what I mean." Eli's voice had the careful quality of a child testing dangerous waters. "You like her the way you liked Ma." "Eli?" "It's okay, Pa. Ma's been gone a long time. It's okay if you like someone else." Luke felt his throat tighten. At 7 years old, his son was offering him permission to move on, to feel something he'd convinced himself he had no right to feel. "It's complicated, son. Miss Clara is... she's important, and you're just the man who saved her life," Eli said simply. "I think that's pretty important too." The boy went back inside, leaving Luke alone with his thoughts and the darkening sky. Maybe Eli was right. Maybe Luke was more important than he gave himself credit for. But that didn't change the fundamental truth. Clara was one of the wealthiest, most powerful women in the territory, and Luke was a cowboy who'd gotten lucky. Whatever he felt, whatever might exist between them, it could never be more than employer and employee. The world didn't work that way. The weeks leading up to the gathering passed in a blur of work. Calving season hit hard, with several difficult births that had Luke up for 3 nights straight helping cows deliver. One of the younger hands quit after a week, unable to handle the isolation and hard work, but Tom Fletcher recommended his cousin to replace him, and the crew stabilized. The garden Eli had planted behind the house started to sprout, tomatoes and beans and squash, tended carefully by the boy every evening after school. Luke found himself falling into a rhythm that felt right. Wake before dawn, check the stock, work with the hands on whatever needed doing, mending fence, moving cattle, maintaining equipment. Lunch was usually jerky and bread eaten in the saddle. Afternoons were spent on the management side, reviewing supplies, checking accounts, planning ahead. Evenings belonged to Eli, helping with homework, listening to stories about school, teaching the boy things Luke wished his own father had taught him. And once a week, Claire's visits, which Luke both anticipated and dreaded. Anticipated because he genuinely enjoyed her company, their conversations about everything and nothing, the way she challenged him to think beyond his limitations. Dreaded because each visit made it harder to maintain the professional distance he knew he should keep. "You're distracted today," Pete observed one afternoon after Clara had left. "Something on your mind, boss?" "Just thinking about the gathering next month. Not sure I'm ready for that kind of scene." Pete spat tobacco juice and gave Luke a knowing look. "The gathering, huh? That what's got you wound tight as a spring? What else would it be? Might be that you're sweet on Mrs. Hayes and don't know what to do about it." Luke felt heat rise to his face. "That's inappropriate, Pete. She's my employer." "She's a widow woman who looks at you like you hung the moon, and you look at her the same way. Don't take a genius to see it." Pete held up a hand before Luke could protest. "Not saying you should do anything about it, boss. Just saying it's there, and pretending it ain't don't make it go away. Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, she's Clara Weston Hayes. I'm nobody. You're the man who saved her life. You're the man she trusted enough to give a partnership to. That's a hell of a lot more than nobody." Pete turned to go, then looked back. "Just think about it, boss. Life's short. Sarah would want you to be happy." The words stayed with Luke long after Pete had gone. Would Sarah want him to be happy? Of course she would. His wife had been the kindest person he'd ever known. Would never have wanted him to spend the rest of his life alone. But wanting happiness and knowing how to find it were two different things. The night before the gathering, Luke stood in his room trying to figure out how to tie a proper cravat. Clara had sent formal clothes, a dark suit, a white shirt with a stiff collar, and this ridiculous piece of silk that was supposed to go around his neck somehow. He'd been struggling with it for 20 minutes when he heard a knock at the door downstairs. "I'll get it," Eli called, and Luke heard his footsteps running to the door, then his excited voice. "Miss Clara, Pa's upstairs trying to tie his necktie thing. He's not very good at it." Clara's laugh drifted up the stairs. "Is he not? Perhaps I should help." Luke's hands froze on the cravat. A moment later, he heard footsteps on the stairs, and then Clara was standing in his doorway, dressed in a simple riding outfit, her hair pulled back in a practical braid. She looked at him struggling with the silk and smiled. "May I?" she asked. Please. I feel like an idiot." She crossed the room and took the ends of the cravat from his hands. Luke stood very still, hyper-aware of her proximity, of the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair, of her fingers deft and sure as they worked the silk into a proper knot. "My father taught me how to tie these," Clara said softly. "Said a woman in business needed to know everything a man knew, including the ridiculous rituals of formal dress." Sounds like a smart man. He was. He died before he could see what I'd make of the ranch, but I like to think he'd be proud. She finished the knot and stepped back, assessing her work. "There. You look quite distinguished, Luke Carter." "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Luke said, but he couldn't help glancing at the mirror. The suit fit well. Clara had somehow gotten his measurements right. And with his hair recently cut and his face shaved smooth, he looked like a different person. Not a poor cowboy anymore, but someone who might actually belong at a fancy gathering. "You look like what you are," Clara said. "A successful ranch manager. My partner." She paused, and Luke saw something flicker in her expression. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" "Terrified," Luke admitted. "I don't know these people, don't know their world. What if I embarrass you?" "You won't," Clara's voice was firm. "You'll be yourself, which is more than most of them can say. They'll put on airs and pretend to be something they're not, but you're genuine, Luke. That's worth more than all their manners and social graces." "Easy for you to say. You grew up in that world." "Did I?" Clara moved to the window, looking out at the darkening land. "My father was a rancher, Luke. We had money, but we weren't society. When I married William, I had to learn all those rules. Had to figure out which fork to use and how to make small talk and which topics were acceptable. It was exhausting. I spent years trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for someone like me." She turned back to him. "That's why I value authenticity. You don't pretend to be something you're not. You're just Luke. Honest, decent Luke Carter who saves strangers in blizzards and expects nothing in return." The intensity in her voice caught Luke off guard. He found himself crossing the room to stand beside her at the window, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Clara, Mrs. Hayes," Eli's voice from downstairs broke the moment. "Pete's here. He says there's a problem with one of the cows." Clara stepped back, the spell broken. "You should go. We can talk more tomorrow." "Yeah, tomorrow." Luke grabbed his hat and headed for the stairs, but he paused at the door. "Clara, thank you for everything. Not just the job, but for believing in me." "Always," she said softly. "I'll always believe in you, Luke." The problem with the cow turned out to be a minor injury that Pete had already handled by the time Luke arrived at the barn, and Luke suspected the old man had made it sound more urgent than it was specifically to give Clara an excuse to leave. Pete had that knowing look again, but he said nothing, just tipped his hat and went back to the bunkhouse. Luke stood in the barn for a long time after everyone had gone, thinking about Clara's words, about the way she'd looked at him, about the moment by the window that had felt charged with possibility. He thought about what Pete had said, about Sarah, about life being short and happiness being worth pursuing. But he also thought about reality, about the gap between a cattle baron and a former drifter, about the complications of mixing business with personal feelings, about the risk of losing everything he'd built if he misread the situation and made a fool of himself. In the end, he did what he always did when faced with impossible questions. He pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the work that needed doing. There'd be time to figure out his feelings later. Right now, he had a gathering to prepare for, a ranch to run, and a son to raise. That was enough. It had to be enough. The gathering started at noon the next day, and Luke arrived at the main ranch with his stomach in knots. The place had been transformed. Lanterns hung from every post, tables laden with food stretched across the lawn, and at least 100 people milled about in their finest clothes. Music drifted from a quartet playing near the house, and servants circulated with trays of drinks in crystal glasses. Luke had never felt more out of place in his life. "Pa, everyone's so fancy," Eli whispered, gripping Luke's hand tightly. The boy wore his own new suit, his hair slicked back with water, looking both adorable and terrified. "We're fancy too," Luke said, trying to sound confident. "We clean up pretty good." "Luke, there you are!" Clara appeared from the crowd, and Luke's breath caught. She wore a deep blue dress that brought out her eyes, her hair arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken hours. She looked elegant, sophisticated, and utterly beyond his reach. Then she smiled at him, and she was just Clara again. "I'm so glad you made it. Come, let me introduce you to some people." She took his arm naturally, as if they did this every day, and led him into the crowd. "This is Marcus Thornton. He runs a ranch east of Helena. Marcus, this is Luke Carter, my new partner at the Copper Ridge operation." "Partner?" Thornton's eyebrows rose as he shook Luke's hand. "That's quite a responsibility, Carter. How long have you been in the cattle business?" "All my life, in one way or another," Luke said carefully. "Though this is my first time managing an operation of this size. And he's doing excellently," Clara added, already under budget and ahead of schedule on several projects. They moved through the crowd, Clara introducing Luke to ranchers and businessmen, lawyers and politicians. Luke shook hands until his arm ached, made small talk about weather and cattle prices, tried to remember names and faces. Some of the men were friendly, interested in the new operation at Copper Ridge. Others were skeptical, looking Luke up and down with expressions that clearly said, "Who is this nobody?" One man in particular, a heavy-set rancher named Garrett, with a florid face and loud voice, seemed determined to put Luke in his place. "So Carter, where did you manage before this?" "I don't recall hearing your name in the business." "I didn't manage anywhere before this, Mr. Garrett. I worked various ranches around the territory." "A drifter, then." Garrett's tone made it sound like an insult. "And Mrs. Hayes made you a partner? That's quite generous." Luke felt anger rising but kept his voice level. "Mrs. Hayes made me an employee with the opportunity to earn a partnership through successful operation. I intend to earn it." "I'm sure you do." Garrett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "It's just unusual, that's all. Most of us work decades to get where we are. You must have some special talent that Mrs. Hayes values." The implication was clear, and Luke felt his hands curl into fists. But before he could respond, Clara stepped forward, her voice cold as winter. "Mr. Carter's talent, Mr. Garrett, is integrity, something you'd do well to develop yourself. He earned his position by saving my life during a blizzard when most men would have ridden past. He's proven himself capable and trustworthy, which is more than I can say for some ranchers who've tried to do business with me over the years. Now, if you'll excuse us, I see Judge Harrison across the lawn, and he's someone actually worth speaking with." She steered Luke away, her grip tight on his arm. Luke could feel her trembling with anger. "I'm sorry about that," she said when they were out of earshot. "Garrett's been bitter ever since I refused to sell him water rights last year. He thinks he can intimidate me by being crude to my associates." "It's fine, Clara. I've dealt with worse." "It's not fine. You don't deserve that kind of treatment." "Maybe he has a point, though. It is unusual what you've done for me. People are going to talk." Clara stopped and turned to face him, her eyes fierce. "Let them talk. I don't make business decisions based on gossip, Luke. I make them based on competence and character, and you have both. If Garrett or anyone else has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly." Looking at her in that moment, protective, fierce, unwilling to let anyone diminish what he'd accomplished, Luke felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just gratitude he felt, wasn't just respect or admiration. This was something deeper, more dangerous, more real. He was falling in love with Clara Weston Hayes. The realization should have terrified him, should have sent him running back to the safe distance of employee and employer. But instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, as inevitable as spring following winter. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for defending me, for believing in me." "Always, son," Clara said, and the word echoed what she'd said the night before, carrying layers of meaning neither was quite ready to speak aloud. The rest of the gathering passed in a blur. Luke made it through without major embarrassment, even managed to have a few interesting conversations with ranchers who saw past his lack of pedigree to recognize his knowledge and work ethic. Eli spent most of the afternoon playing with the other children, coming back to Luke periodically with reports of games and adventures. As the sun began to set and guests started to depart, Luke found himself alone with Clara on the porch of the main house, watching the last colors fade from the sky. "You did well today," Clara said. "Better than well. You held your own with people who've been in this business their entire lives." "I had a good teacher." "You had natural ability. I just helped you see it." She was quiet for a moment, then added softly, "Luke, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever think about what happens after? After the 2 years are up and you have your partnership? Do you see yourself staying in Copper Ridge long term, or is this just a stepping stone to something else?" Luke considered the question carefully. "A year ago, I couldn't see past the next day, the next job, the next meal. Now I can see years ahead. I see Eli growing up on that land, maybe taking over the operation someday. I see building something that lasts, that matters. So yeah, I see myself staying. If you'll have me." "I'll have you, yeah," Clara said, and there was something in her voice that made Luke look at her sharply. She was watching him with an expression he'd seen before but never let himself acknowledge. Longing, hope, fear, all mixed together. The same things he felt. "Clara," he began, but she shook her head. "Don't. Not yet. We both have too much at stake, too much to lose. Let's get through the 2 years. Let's make the operation successful. Then we can talk about other things." It was the right decision, the sensible decision. But as Luke rode home that night with Eli drowsing in front of him in the saddle, he couldn't help but think that sometimes sense and safety weren't the same as happiness. And for the first time in years, he wanted to be happy more than he wanted to be safe. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent, and Luke made a promise to himself. He'd earn that partnership, build something Clara could be proud of, prove he was worth the risk she'd taken on him. And then, when the time was right, he'd tell her what he was only beginning to admit to himself. That somewhere between a blizzard and a new beginning, between saving a stranger and being saved in return, he'd found something he'd thought he'd lost forever. The possibility of love. Summer came to Copper Ridge with a vengeance. The kind of heat that made everything shimmer and shift in the distance like a mirage. The cattle grew fat on good grass, the creek ran steady despite the dry spell, and the operation that Luke had built from nothing began to prove itself as more than just an experiment. By July, they'd completed the first drive to market, selling 200 head at prices that exceeded Clara's projections. The profit went into the ranch account, solid proof that Luke Carter knew what he was doing. But success brought its own complications. Word spread through the territory about the Copper Ridge operation, about the former drifter who'd become Clara Hayes' partner, about the unprecedented arrangement between a powerful widow and a man nobody had heard of 6 months ago. Some of the talk was admiring. Luke had proven himself capable, after all. But much of it was uglier, whispered insinuations about how a nobody had risen so fast, about what Clara must be getting in return for her generosity. Luke heard the rumors secondhand through Pete and the other hands who went into town and came back with tight expressions and carefully neutral reports about what people were saying. He tried not to let it bother him, tried to focus on the work and the results, but the whispers gnawed at him nonetheless. Not because he cared what strangers thought, but because he knew the rumors would hurt Clara, would add to the burden she already carried as a woman operating in a man's world. "You shouldn't let it get to you, boss," Tom Fletcher said one afternoon as they worked on reinforcing a section of fence. "People always got something to say about folks doing better than they are." "It's not me I'm worried about," Luke replied, driving a post into the hard ground with more force than necessary. "It's Mrs. Hayes. She's worked too hard to have her reputation damaged by gossip. Mrs. Hayes can handle herself. Besides, the people who matter know the truth." Luke wanted to believe that, but he'd seen how Clara's shoulders had grown tighter over the past weeks, how the lines around her eyes had deepened. The stress of managing the entire Hayes operation was taking its toll, and the rumors about her arrangement with Luke only added weight to an already crushing load. It all came to a head in late July, when Clara arrived at Copper Ridge unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon, riding hard enough that her horse was lathered with sweat. Luke was in the barn checking on a mare about to foal when he heard the thunder of hooves and came out to find Clara dismounting in a way that spoke of barely controlled fury. "Clara, what's wrong? Is it the main ranch? Is someone hurt?" "No one's hurt, at least not physically." She handed her reins to Bobby Chen, who'd appeared from the corral, and strode toward the house. "I need to talk to you. Now." Luke followed her into his study, closing the door behind them. Clara paced the small room like a caged animal, her riding outfit dusty from the road, her hair coming loose from its pins. He'd never seen her like this. Not composed, not controlled, but raw with emotion. Clara, tell me what happened. She stopped pacing and turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The bank and Helena. They've refused to extend credit for the expansion I planned into the Eastern Territories. Do you know why? Because they've heard rumors that I'm not managing my business properly, that I'm making decisions based on emotion rather than sound judgment. They cited my arrangement with you as evidence of my compromised position. Plus, Luke felt like he'd been punched in the gut. They think because you hired me, they think because I hired you and made you a partner, I must be emotionally involved in a way that clouds my business sense. They used words like inappropriate and unwise. One of the board members actually suggested I might be too distracted to run the Hayes Cattle Company effectively. Her voice shook with rage. 20 years of proven success, of building an empire from my husband's modest operation, and they question my judgment because I chose to trust a good man. Then maybe I should step down, Luke said quietly. If my presence is damaging your reputation, your business, no. The word came out sharp, definitive. Absolutely not. You've done nothing wrong, Luke. You've exceeded every expectation, proven yourself 10 times over. I won't let them drive you away because they can't conceive of a professional relationship between a man and a woman that isn't based on something sordid. But, Clara, if this is costing you opportunities, then I'll find other opportunities. She moved closer to him, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Do you know what the real problem is, Luke? The real problem is that they're half right. Not about you being unqualified. You're more than qualified. Not about this being a bad business decision. It's been an excellent one, but they're right that I'm emotionally involved, because I am. I have been since the moment you refused payment for saving my life, since you looked at me like I was a person instead of an opportunity. The words hung between them, electric and dangerous. Luke's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Clara, you don't have to say this. Yes, I do. I've been lying to myself for months, pretending this is purely professional, that what I feel for you is just respect and gratitude. But it's not, Luke. It's not, and I think you know it, and I think you feel the same way, and I'm so tired of pretending. Luke took a step toward her, then stopped himself. Of course I feel the same way. I've been in love with you since that day at the gathering when you defended me to Garrett. Maybe before that. But Clara, your reputation, my reputation has survived worse than falling in love with a good man. She closed the distance between them, looking up at him with eyes that held defiance and vulnerability in equal measure. I'm tired of living my life according to what other people think is proper. William's been dead for 5 years. I've proven myself 100 times over. When do I get to be happy? When do I get to choose something for myself instead of for the business? This could ruin you, Luke said, though even as he spoke, he knew he was fighting a losing battle against what they both wanted. People will say terrible things. They'll question every decision you make. Let them. I've been fighting those battles my entire adult life. At least this time I'd be fighting for something that matters. She reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. You matter, Luke. More than the business, more than my reputation. You and Eli, you've become my family, the only real family I have left. Luke covered her hand with his own, turning his face to press a kiss to her palm. You're sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. Everything changes. Everything changed the moment you pulled me out of that snowdrift, Clara said softly. We've just been pretending it didn't. He kissed her then, and it felt like coming home, like the end of a long journey through cold and darkness into warmth and light. She kissed him back with equal hunger, her arms wrapping around his neck, years of loneliness and careful distance dissolving in the space of a heartbeat. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Luke rested his forehead against hers. What do we do now? Now we stop hiding. Stop pretending this is just business. I don't know what that looks like exactly, but we figure it out together. She pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. I'm not saying we run off and get married tomorrow. We both need time to adjust to this, and Eli needs to be considered. But I'm done lying to the world about what you mean to me. The world isn't going to like it. The world doesn't have to like it. They just have to deal with it. Clara's smile was fierce, determined. Let them talk, Luke. Let them whisper and gossip and make up whatever stories they want. The truth is simple. You're the best man I know, and I refuse to be ashamed of loving you. A knock on the study door made them both jump apart. Pa? Eli's voice came through the wood. Miss Clara's horse needs water, and Bobby says should he unsaddle her, or is she leaving soon? Luke opened the door to find his son standing there with an innocent expression that wasn't quite as innocent as it should be. The boy's eyes darted between Luke and Clara, taking in their flushed faces and disheveled appearance with the uncomfortable perceptiveness of children. Tell Bobby to unsaddle her and give the horse a good rub-down, Luke said. Miss Clara will be staying for supper. Okay. Eli started to leave, then turned back. Are you and Miss Clara going to get married? Eli. Luke felt heat rising to his face. That's not an appropriate question. Why not? You like her and she likes you. That's what people do when they like each other, isn't it? They get married? Clara laughed, a genuine sound that broke the tension. Your father's right that it's not an appropriate question, Eli. But to answer it anyway, we're not getting married right now. We're just figuring things out. But maybe later you will? Maybe later, Clara agreed, and the look she gave Luke made his heart skip. Now go help Bobby with the horse. After Eli left, Luke turned to Clara. I'm sorry about that. He's been asking questions lately about whether I'd ever get married again, and I should have been more careful. Don't apologize. He's a smart boy who wants his father to be happy. There's nothing wrong with that. Clara moved to the window, looking out at the land they were building together. We should tell him, you know. He deserves to know what's happening, that things are changing. Are you sure? Once we tell Eli, it'll be real. He'll tell his friends. Word will spread. Good. Let it spread. I meant what I said, Luke. I'm done hiding. She turned back to him, her expression serious. But I want to be clear about something. This doesn't change our business arrangement. You're still earning that partnership through your work, not through our relationship. I need you to understand that. I do understand, and I appreciate you making that distinction. I'm not saying it because I don't trust you. I'm saying it because I know how people will interpret this, and I want us both to be clear about where the lines are. Your success here is yours, not something I gave you because we're involved. That night at supper, with Eli chattering about school and Bobby's promise to teach him rope tricks, Luke watched Clara across the table and thought about how much his life had changed in 6 months. From a man with nothing to a man with everything that mattered. A home, meaningful work, a son who was thriving, and now the love of a woman he'd once pulled from a snowdrift. After Eli went to bed, Luke and Clara sat on the porch in the cooling evening air, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Clara had changed into one of the simple dresses she kept at the ranch house for overnight stays, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking more at peace than Luke had seen her in weeks. I should go back to the main ranch tomorrow, she said. There's a meeting with the stock buyers, and Jenkins needs my approval on some equipment purchases. Will you tell people? About us? Eventually. I want to let the dust settle from the bank situation first, make sure we're on solid ground before adding more fuel to the gossip fire. She leaned her head against his shoulder. But Luke, I want you to know, whatever happens, whatever they say or do, I don't regret this. I won't regret it. Neither will I. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Luke felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Contentment. Not the absence of problems or worries, but the presence of something worth fighting for, worth protecting. The next few weeks tested that resolve in ways neither of them had anticipated. The rumors intensified when word leaked that Clara had been seen staying overnight at Copper Ridge, that she and Luke had been observed in town together looking less than purely professional. Garrett, the rancher who'd been rude at the gathering, made pointed comments at a cattlemen's association meeting about the Hayes Cattle Company being run on sentiment rather than sense. The bank in Helena, emboldened by gossip, sent a formal letter questioning Clara's decision-making capacity. Through it all, Clara remained defiant, conducting business as usual, refusing to acknowledge the whispers or modify her behavior to appease the gossips. She visited Copper Ridge weekly, sometimes staying overnight, and if people wanted to make assumptions, let them. The operation's success spoke for itself. By August, Copper Ridge had turned a profit that exceeded first-year projections by 30%, but the stress showed. Luke saw it in the tightness around Clara's eyes. in the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. She was fighting a war on multiple fronts, managing the business, dealing with the gossip, and navigating a new relationship with Luke, all while maintaining the iron composure expected of someone in her position. It was Eli, surprisingly, who forced the issue. The boy had been unusually quiet for several days, withdrawn in a way that worried Luke. When pressed, he finally admitted that kids at school had been teasing him about his father and Miss Clara, saying crude things that made Eli's ears burn and his fists clench. "They said you were only with Miss Clara for her money," Eli told Luke one night, his voice small and hurt. "They said mean things about her too, about why she'd be with someone like us." Luke felt rage boil up inside him, hot and righteous. "Did you tell your teacher?" "No, I hit Billy Thornton instead. He's the one who said the worst stuff. Now the teacher says I'm suspended for 3 days. Luke should have been angry about the fighting, about the suspension, but all he felt was a weary sword of understanding. This was the cost of loving Clara, not just to him, but to Eli too. The boy was paying for his father's choices, bearing burdens no 7-year-old should have to carry. That night, after Eli was asleep, Luke rode to the main ranch. He didn't send word ahead, didn't plan what he was going to say. He just knew he needed to see Clara, needed to talk about what was happening and whether they were being selfish, whether their happiness was worth the price others were paying. He found her in her office, working late as usual, lamplight casting shadows across her tired face. She looked up when he entered, and her expression immediately shifted from weary concentration to concern. "Luke, what's wrong? Is Eli okay?" "He's fine, physically fine. But Clara, we need to talk." Over the next hour, Luke told her everything, about the teasing, the suspension, the way the gossip was affecting his son. He tried to be fair, tried to present it without blame, but the facts were damning enough on their own. When he finished, Clara sat back in her chair, her face pale. "I've been so focused on fighting my own battles that I didn't consider how this would affect Eli. Luke, I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault except the small-minded people who can't mind their own business." Luke ran a hand through his hair. "But I'm starting to wonder if we made a mistake. If maybe we should have waited, kept things professional until when?" Clara's voice was sharp. "Until it was convenient? Until people decided to give us permission to be happy? Luke, there was never going to be a right time. People were always going to talk, were always going to judge." "But Eli is paying a price, yes, and that's terrible. And I'll do everything I can to protect him. But Luke, think about what we're teaching him if we back away from this. We're teaching him that love is something to be ashamed of, that he should hide who he is and what he feels to make other people comfortable. Is that really the lesson you want him to learn?" Luke was quiet, turning her words over in his mind. She was right, he realized. Running away from this, hiding what they felt for each other, would only teach Eli that happiness was something to be sacrificed for the approval of people who didn't matter. "No," he said finally. "No, that's not what I want to teach him. But Clara, I also don't want him to suffer because of choices we made." Then we help him through it. We teach him how to handle people who are cruel, how to rise above gossip, how to be proud of who he is and where he comes from. Clara stood and came around the desk, taking Luke's hands in hers. "I know this is hard. I know it's not what you signed up for when you accepted my offer. But I meant what I said. You and Eli are my family now. I protect my family. Even if it costs you? Especially then." She squeezed his hands. "Tomorrow, I'm going to the school. I'm going to have a conversation with that teacher and the principal and anyone else who needs to hear it. I'm going to make it very clear that Eli Carter is under my protection, and anyone who mistreats him will answer to me. And then I'm going to take out an announcement in the territory newspaper." "An announcement?" "An engagement announcement. If people are going to talk, let's give them something real to talk about." Luke felt his heart stop. "Clara, are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to make this official, to stop letting other people control our narrative and start writing our own." Her eyes were bright, determined. "I love you, Luke Carter. I want to marry you, want to be a proper family with you and Eli. But more than that, I want to show everyone in this territory that I choose you, that you're worthy of that choice, and that anyone who has a problem with it can go straight to hell. That's the worst marriage proposal I've ever heard, Luke said, but he was smiling. It's the only marriage proposal you've ever heard. True, and yes. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you, Clara Weston Hayes. I'll stand beside you and fight with you and build something that matters with you, for better or worse, through gossip and scandal and whatever else this territory wants to throw at us. Clara kissed him then, fierce and claiming, and Luke thought about the night he'd pulled her from that snowdrift, how he'd had no idea that saving one life would transform his own so completely. He'd been trying to do the right thing, nothing more, and somehow that simple act of decency had led him here. To this moment, this woman, this future he'd never dared to imagine. There's one condition, though, Luke said when they broke apart. What's that? We tell Eli together tomorrow morning. He's part of this too, and he deserves to know before the whole territory does. Agreed. And Luke, thank you for fighting for us, for not running when things got hard. Where would I run to? Luke asked softly. You're my home now, Clara. You and Eli and that ranch we're building. I'm not going anywhere. The next morning, they sat Eli down at the breakfast table and told him the news. The boy's face went through a series of expressions, surprise, confusion, and then pure joy that lit up the room like sunshine. So Miss Clara is going to be my new ma? Eli asked, looking between them with wide eyes. If that's all right with you, Clara said. I know I can't replace your mother, Eli. I wouldn't want to try, but I'd like to be part of your family if you'll have me. Eli launched himself at Clara, wrapping his arms around her waist and burying his face in her shoulder. Luke saw tears streaming down Clara's face as she held the boy close, and he felt his own throat tighten with emotion. I'll have you, Eli said, his voice muffled. And Pa will have you too. We'll both have you, and you'll have us, and we'll be a real family. Yes, Clara whispered, meeting Luke's eyes over Eli's head. We'll be a real family. The announcement appeared in the Montana Territory Register 3 days later, a formal notice that Clara Weston Hayes and Luke Carter would be wed in September at the Hayes Ranch. The response was immediate and mixed. Congratulations from some, continued whispers from others, and one particularly vitriolic editorial from an Eastern newspaper about the degradation of proper social standards in the wild territories. Clara read that one aloud to Luke and laughed until tears ran down her face. Degradation of proper social standards. They make us sound positively scandalous. Aren't we, though? Luke asked, reading over her shoulder. Former drifter marries cattle queen? That's pretty scandalous by anyone's standards. Good. Let them be scandalized. I've been proper and respectable my entire life. Time to shake things up. The wedding was set for the first week of September, giving them time to prepare and for the initial furor to die down. Clara wanted something simple, just close friends and business associates, no elaborate affair that would turn into a spectacle. Luke agreed readily, having no desire for a big production. As long as he ended the day married to Clara, the details didn't matter much. But as the date approached, Luke found himself thinking more and more about what this meant, about the responsibility he was taking on. He wasn't just marrying Clara. He was becoming part of the Hayes legacy, stepping into a role that would define the rest of his life. It was what he wanted, but it was also terrifying in its enormity. One evening, a week before the wedding, Pete found Luke in the barn long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring at nothing in particular. Getting cold feet, boss? No, maybe. I don't know. Luke looked at his foreman. What if I'm not enough, Pete? What if I can't live up to what she needs, what this life requires? Pete was quiet for a long moment, then spat tobacco juice into the straw. You want to know what I think? That's why I'm asking. I think you're the exact kind of man Mrs. Hayes needs, not because you're perfect or because you have all the answers, but because you're honest. You saved her life when you didn't have to. You refused payment when you needed the money. You've worked your ass off to build this operation into something profitable. And most importantly, you love her for who she is, not for what she has. Pete fixed Luke with a steady look. That's rare, boss. That's worth more than all the experience and polish in the world. What if people never accept us? What if this damages her business permanently? Then you'll rebuild, together. That's what marriage is, facing whatever comes and dealing with it side by side. Pete stood to leave, then paused. My wife and I, we've been married 42 years. Know what I've learned? It ain't the easy times that make a marriage. It's the hard times, when you have to choose whether to run or fight. You and Mrs. Hayes, you're choosing to fight. That tells me you're going to be just fine. After Pete left, Luke sat alone in the quiet barn and thought about fighting, about choices, about the strange path that had led him from a snowdrift to the edge of forever with a woman he'd never expected to meet. He thought about Sarah too, hoping wherever she was, she'd approve of this new chapter, this new chance at happiness he'd been given. The stars were bright through the barn door, the same stars that had looked down on him that terrible night in the blizzard, and Luke felt a sense of peace settle over him. He was ready to marry Clara, ready to be a proper father to Eli, ready to build the life they'd all been reaching for. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that, Luke realized, was all that really mattered. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and golden, the kind of September day that makes you believe summer might last forever. Luke stood in front of the mirror in one of the guest rooms at the main ranch house, struggling with his collar for the third time. His hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the sheer weight of the moment. In a few hours, he would marry Clara Weston Hayes, and his life would be forever divided into before and after this day. Here, let me help. Jenkins, Clara's foreman, appeared in the doorway with an amused expression. The old cowboy had appointed himself Luke's unofficial attendant, despite Luke's protests that he didn't need one. You're going to strangle yourself if you keep pulling at it like that. I feel like I'm already being strangled, Luke muttered, but he held still while Jenkins adjusted the collar with practiced efficiency. Been to a lot of weddings in my time, Jenkins said, his weathered hand surprisingly gentle. Never seen a groom look quite so terrified and happy at the same time. That about sums it up. For what it's worth, Carter, I had my doubts about you at first. Thought maybe Mrs. Hayes was making a mistake, letting sentiment cloud her judgment. But you've proven me wrong. The Copper Ridge operation is running better than I expected, and more importantly, I haven't seen the boss lady this happy since before Mr. Hayes passed. You're good for her. The words meant more than Jenkins probably knew. Acceptance from a man like him, someone who'd been with the Hayes family for decades, who'd seen Clara through her hardest times, that was worth more than all the society approval in the territory. Thank you, Jenkins. That means a lot. Don't let it go to your head. You've still got a lot to learn about running a major operation. But Jenkins was smiling as he said it, and when he left, he clapped Luke on the shoulder in a gesture of genuine warmth. Luke finished dressing and went to find Eli. The boy was in his own room, also struggling with formal clothes, his hair slicked down with water and already starting to rebel. He looked up when Luke entered, and the expression on his young face was so serious it made Luke's heart ache. Pa, I've been thinking. About what, son? About Ma. About whether it's okay that we're doing this, that you're marrying Miss Clara, because I love Ma, and I don't want her to think we're forgetting her. Luke sat down on the bed and pulled Eli close. We're not forgetting her, Eli. We could never forget her. Your Ma was the best person I ever knew, and she'll always be part of us, part of who we are. But she wouldn't want us to be alone forever, to be sad forever. She'd want us to be happy. You think she'd like Miss Clara? I think she'd love Miss Clara. They're similar in a lot of ways, both strong, both kind, both the type of women who see the best in people. Luke tilted Eli's chin up so they were eye to eye. Your Ma would be happy for us, son. I truly believe that. And if you're not ready for this, if it feels too fast or too wrong, you need to tell me now, because you're just as important in this decision as I am. Eli was quiet for a long moment, his young face working through complicated emotions. Then he said, I am ready, Pa. I like Miss Clara a lot. And I like seeing you smile again, the way you used to smile before Ma got sick. I just wanted to make sure it was okay to be happy. It's more than okay, Luke said, his voice thick. It's exactly what we're supposed to do. Keep living, keep finding reasons to smile, keep building something good out of what we've been given. They held each other for a moment, father and son, both dressed in their finest, both standing on the edge of a new beginning. Then Eli pulled back and grinned, suddenly a 7-year-old boy again, instead of a miniature philosopher. Do you think there will be cake at the wedding? I certainly hope so. Good. Because I heard Mrs. Patterson talking about a chocolate cake as big as a wagon wheel, and if that's true, I want to make sure I get a really big piece. Luke laughed, the tension in his chest easing. I'll make sure you get the biggest piece, son. After the bride, of course. Of course, Eli agreed solemnly. Ladies first. Ma taught me that. The ceremony was set for noon in the main ranch's garden, a space Clara had transformed over the years into something beautiful. Roses and wild flowers, a stone pathway, trees that provided dappled shade. About 50 guests had assembled, seated in neat rows on chairs borrowed from the church in Three Forks. Luke recognized most of them, neighboring ranchers, business associates, a few politicians who'd been smart enough to stay on Clara's good side. Some faces were friendly, others neutral, a few openly skeptical. But they were here, which meant something. Notably absent was Garrett, and several of the cattlemen who'd been most vocal in their criticism. Luke tried not to feel satisfaction at that, tried to be the bigger man, but he couldn't help a small sense of vindication. Clara had invited them as a gesture of goodwill, and they'd refused to come. Their loss. Luke stood at the front with the minister, Pete beside him as his best man, trying not to fidget with his collar. Eli sat in the front row with Mrs. Patterson, looking impossibly small in his new suit, clutching a ring in his sweaty palm, the simple gold band that had belonged to Luke's mother, the only thing of value he'd inherited when she died. The minister, a practical man named Reverend Michaels, who'd known both Clara and William Hayes, gave Luke an encouraging nod. Breathe, son. She's not going to change her mind. How do you know? Because I've known Clara Hayes for 15 years, and I've never once seen her doubt a decision she'd made. If she says she's marrying you, then she's marrying you. Then the music started, a simple fiddle tune played by one of the ranch hands who had a gift for it, and everyone turned to look. Clara appeared at the far end of the garden on Jenkins's arm, and Luke's breath caught in his throat. She wore a dress the color of cream, simple but elegant, with her dark hair swept up in a way that made her look both regal and approachable. She wasn't wearing a veil, Clara was too practical for that, but she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that matched the ones growing in her garden. She looked beautiful, yes, but more than that, she looked happy. Genuinely, radiantly happy in a way Luke had never seen before. Their eyes met across the distance, and Clara smiled. Not the polite smile she used for business associates or the careful smile she wore in public, but the real smile she saved for moments that mattered. Luke felt his own face break into a grin, felt his nervousness evaporate like morning dew. This was right. This was exactly where he was supposed to be. Clara walked toward him with steady steps, her hand light on Jenkins' arm, her eyes never leaving Luke's face. When they reached the front, Jenkins placed her hand in Luke's with surprising gentleness. Take care of her, Carter, he murmured, low enough that only Luke could hear. She deserves to be happy. I will. I promise. Then Jenkins stepped back, and it was just Luke and Clara standing before the minister, their hands clasped together, the whole world narrowed down to this moment, this choice, this future they were building together. Reverend Michaels cleared his throat. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Clara Weston Hayes and Luke Carter in holy matrimony. This is a joyous occasion, a celebration of love and commitment, and I am honored to officiate. The ceremony was mercifully brief. Reverend Michaels knew his audience, knew that cattlemen and cowboys had limited patience for lengthy sermons. He spoke about partnership and trust, about building something together that was stronger than what either could build alone, about the courage it took to choose love after loss. His words were simple but sincere, and Luke felt them settle into his bones like truth. Do you, Clara Weston Hayes, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. Clara's voice was steady, clear, ringing out across the garden like a declaration of war against anyone who doubted them. And do you, Luke Carter, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do. Luke's voice was quieter than Clara's, but no less certain. The rings, please. Eli stood up and brought forward the ring, placing it carefully in Luke's palm. Luke saw his own mother's ring there, simple gold worn smooth with age, and felt a connection to the past, to the woman who'd raised him to be decent and honest and kind. He slipped it onto Clara's finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. Clara had a ring for him too, wider and heavier than he'd expected, inscribed on the inside with words he'd read when she gave it to him the night before. Kindness returned. He'd had to look away when he read it, overcome by the reminder of where they'd started, of how one act on a frozen night had led to this. By the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, and in the sight of God and these witnesses, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Luke, you may kiss your bride. Luke pulled Clara close and kissed her, and the garden erupted in applause and cheers. It wasn't universal. He could see some stiff faces in the crowd, some people who clapped only because it would be rude not to. But most of the guests seemed genuinely happy, genuinely moved by what they'd witnessed. When they broke apart, Clara was crying, tears streaming down her face even as she laughed. I can't believe we actually did it. Having second thoughts already, Mrs. Carter? Not for a single second, Mr. Carter. Not for a single second. The reception that followed was everything Luke had never known he wanted. Good food, better whiskey, music and dancing, and people celebrating without reservation. Mrs. Patterson's chocolate cake was indeed as big as a wagon wheel, and Eli got his promised large slice, ending up with frosting smeared across his face and complete contentment in his eyes. Luke danced with Clara, both of them laughing at his clumsy steps, not caring that half the territory was watching. He danced with Eli, lifting the boy onto his feet so they could spin around together. He even danced with Mrs. Patterson, who proved surprisingly light on her feet for a woman who spent most of her time managing a household. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Luke found himself standing at the edge of the garden with Pete, watching Clara talk with a group of neighboring ranchers. She was explaining something with animated gestures, completely in her element, and Luke felt a surge of pride so strong it almost hurt. You did good, boss, Pete said, taking a pull from his whiskey. Real good. I got lucky, Luke corrected. Luckiest damn day of my life was when I found her in that blizzard. Wasn't luck. Was you being the kind of man who stops to help strangers even when it costs him something? That's character, and character makes its own luck. Pete looked at him sideways. You know what's going to happen now, don't you? What's that? You're going to be one of the most powerful men in the territory, partner in the Hayes Cattle Company, married to the woman who runs it. That's going to make some people nervous, going to make others jealous. You ready for that? Luke thought about it, about the responsibility he'd taken on, about the targets they'd both be wearing now. Ready or not, here it comes. But Pete, I want you to know, this doesn't change how I run Copper Ridge. I'm still going to work the same way, still going to listen to you and the other hands, still going to earn my place every day. I know you will. That's why this is going to work. Later, as the stars began to emerge and lanterns were lit throughout the garden, Luke and Clara slipped away from the crowd for a moment of privacy. They walked to the far end of the property, to a hill that overlooked the valley, the same spot where Clara had first asked Luke if he could build a legacy. Well, Clara said, leaning against him, we did it. We're married, officially scandalous, and the world didn't end. The world still got time, Luke said, but he was smiling. Give it a few days. Always the optimist. She turned in his arms to face him. Thank you, Luke, for taking this chance with me, for not running when things got hard, for being exactly who you are. I should be thanking you. 6 months ago, I had nothing. Now I have everything. You always had everything that mattered: integrity, courage, kindness. I just gave you a chance to show it. Clara kissed him softly. We're partners now, in every sense. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Together, Luke agreed. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, looking out at the land that was theirs now. Not by inheritance or luck, but by choice, by hard work, by the simple decision to believe in each other when the rest of the world doubted. The weeks and months that followed were not easy. The gossip continued, though it evolved from shock and scandal to grudging acceptance to, eventually, something like respect. The Copper Ridge operation continued to thrive, exceeding all projections, and when the first year's profits were calculated, even the most skeptical ranchers had to admit that Clara's judgment had been sound. The bank in Helena eventually extended the credit they'd initially refused. Though Clara made them work for it, extracting better terms than they'd originally offered. Never let them see you desperate, she told Luke. That's when they take advantage. Garrett, the rancher who'd been so rude at the gathering, suffered a series of setbacks: bad weather, cattle disease, poor management decisions. By the following spring, he was forced to sell a portion of his land to cover debts. Clara bought it, not out of revenge, but because it was a good business decision, and offered Garrett a job managing the property. He refused at first, pride warring with necessity, but eventually accepted. It was a humiliation for him, but a lesson too, that in this territory, integrity mattered more than appearances. Eli thrived in his new life. The teasing at school eventually stopped, partly because Clara made good on her promise to have stern conversations with school officials, partly because Eli learned to handle himself with a confidence he'd never had before. He stopped being the poor kid whose father drifted from job to job and became the boy whose mother ran the biggest ranch in the territory, whose father had earned a partnership through competence and character. One evening in late October, more than a year after the wedding, Luke sat in his study at Copper Ridge going over the books. The numbers were good. Better than good. They'd not only met, but exceeded every target Clara had set. In another year, Luke's partnership would be official, 10% of Copper Ridge his in deed as well as name. Clara appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl against the autumn chill, her hair loose around her shoulders. Still working? Just finishing up. We had a good month. We had a great month. She crossed the room and looked over his shoulder at the ledger. Luke, I've been thinking about something. What's that? The partnership agreement. The one that says, after 2 years of successful operation, you get 10% of Copper Ridge. She paused. I want to change it. Luke felt his stomach drop. After everything, was she having second thoughts? Clara, if I've done something, stop. You haven't done anything wrong. Quite the opposite. She pulled a document from the pocket of her shawl and laid it on the desk. I want to make it 50%. Equal partners, effective immediately. This operation is as much yours as mine, Luke. You've built it from nothing, made it profitable, proved yourself a dozen times over. The original agreement doesn't reflect that. Luke stared at the document, at the numbers that would transform him from an employee earning a partnership to a full co-owner of one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Clara, this is too much. You've earned every bit of it. And Luke, it's not just about Copper Ridge. I want to restructure the entire Hayes Cattle Company. Make you a full partner in the whole operation. Jenkins is ready to retire, and I need someone I can trust absolutely to help me run things. Someone who sees the bigger picture, who understands that business is about people, not just profits. That's enormous, Clara. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. She knelt beside his chair so they were eye level. When I pulled you into this, I thought I was hiring a manager. What I got was a partner in every sense, someone who challenges me, supports me, builds with me. This company should reflect that reality. Besides, she smiled slightly. I'm pregnant. The world tilted. Luke gripped the arms of his chair, certain he'd misheard. You're what? Pregnant. About 3 months along, according to the doctor. I wanted to be sure before I told you. Her smile widened at his shocked expression. We're going to have a baby, Luke. And I want our child to inherit something we built together, not something that's legally just mine with you as a junior partner. Luke pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, feeling tears sting his eyes. A baby. They were going to have a baby. Eli would have a brother or sister. Their family would grow, this beautiful, unlikely, precious family they'd built from nothing. I don't know what to say, he managed. Say yes to the partnership. Say you'll help me build something even bigger and better than what we have now. Say you'll be there when this baby comes, the same way you were there in that blizzard, steady, strong, refusing to let go no matter what. Yes, to all of it. Always yes. That winter was mild by Montana standards, as if the territory itself had decided to give them a break after the trials of the previous year. Luke and Clara worked side by side, restructuring the Hayes Cattle Company into a true partnership, making decisions together, planning for a future that suddenly seemed limitless. Eli, when told about the coming baby, was ecstatic. I'm going to be a big brother. I'm going to teach the baby everything, how to ride, how to rope, how to find the best fishing spots. The baby probably won't be doing any of that for a while, Luke pointed out. Then I'll wait. I'm good at waiting. In March, Jenkins officially retired, throwing a party that involved most of the territory and enough whiskey to float a riverboat. In his farewell speech, slightly slurred but heartfelt, he told everyone who'd listen that Luke Carter was the finest ranch manager he'd ever worked with, and anyone who thought otherwise was a damned fool. Coming from Jenkins, who was not known for excessive praise, the words carried weight. The baby came in early May, arriving 3 weeks early, but healthy and loud. A girl with Clara's dark hair and Luke's gray eyes, weighing just over 6 pounds and possessing lungs that could wake the dead. They named her Sarah, after Luke's first wife, a gesture that made Eli cry and Clara squeeze Luke's hand so tight it hurt. "You're sure?" Clara asked, holding the baby close. "You're sure you want to name her after?" "I'm sure. Sarah was part of what made me who I am, part of what led me to you. It feels right to honor that, to keep her memory alive." Luke looked down at his daughter, at this tiny person who represented hope and future and the impossible beauty of second chances. She'd be happy knowing she had a namesake. Standing in that room with his wife and newborn daughter, with Eli peeking around the doorframe trying to get a glimpse of his baby sister, Luke thought about the journey that had brought him here. He thought about that terrible night in the blizzard, about the dark shape in the snow, about the split-second decision to stop and help that had changed everything. He'd saved Clara's life that night, but the truth was she'd saved his too. She'd given him purpose, partnership, a future worth building. She'd reminded him that goodness existed, that kindness mattered, that one decent act could ripple outward in ways you could never predict. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked softly, watching his face. "How lucky I am. How one night, one choice, changed my entire life." "It wasn't luck, Luke. It was character. You made the choice to stop, to help, to care about a stranger. That's who you are." She shifted the baby so Luke could see her better. "And that's who our children will be too. We'll teach them that legacy, that kindness matters, that integrity counts, that the measure of a person isn't what they have, but what they do with what they're given." Through the window, Luke could see the Copper Ridge Ranch spread out in the spring sunshine, the house they'd built, the corrals full of horses, the cattle dotting the hills, the land they'd transformed from an idea into a thriving operation. Beyond that, invisible but no less real, stretched the entire Hayes Cattle Company, now as much his as Clara's, a partnership forged in trust and proved in success. It was everything he'd never dared to dream of, and it had all started with a simple choice on a frozen night, to be the kind of man who stops to help, who gives without expecting return, who believes that doing the right thing is its own reward. "Pa?" Eli finally ventured fully into the room, his eyes wide as he looked at the baby. "Is that really our baby? She's so small." "She is. Come meet your sister." Eli approached carefully, reverently, and when Clara placed little Sarah in his arms, supporting the baby's head, making sure he had a good grip, the boy's face transformed with wonder. "Hi, Sarah," he whispered. "I'm your big brother Eli. I'm going to protect you and teach you stuff and make sure nobody's ever mean to you. And I'm going to tell you about our other ma, too, the one you're named after, because she was really great, and you should know about her." Luke felt his throat close with emotion. This was his family, his wife, his son, his daughter. This was the life he'd built from nothing, the future he'd earned through hard work and honest dealing and the simple refusal to give up even when things seemed impossible. Clara reached out and took his hand, their fingers intertwining, and they stood together looking at their children, one born to them, one born to another, but claimed as their own, both loved beyond measure. "We did it," Clara said quietly. "We built something real." "We did. And we're not done yet. There's more to build, more to create, more to achieve." "Together?" "Always together." Outside, the sun climbed higher in the Montana sky, warming the land they'd claimed, the legacy they were creating. Somewhere in the territory, people were probably still talking, still gossiping about the unlikely marriage between the cattle queen and the cowboy. But their words had lost their power, become background noise that no longer mattered. What mattered was this: family, partnership, the future stretching ahead full of possibility. What mattered was that one act of kindness on a desperate night had bloomed into something beautiful, something lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. Luke Carter had saved a stranger in a blizzard, not knowing she owned the largest ranch in the territory. But what he'd really saved was himself. From loneliness, from purposelessness, from a life half-lived. And what Clara had saved was her faith that good people still existed, that trust could be repaid, that love was worth the risk. They'd found each other in the worst conditions, in the darkest moment, and they'd built something bright enough to light their way forward for the rest of their lives. And in the end, that was the truest kind of success. Not wealth or power or prestige, but the simple, profound gift of becoming the people they were meant to be, together. The baby stirred in Eli's arms, making small sounds, and Clara gently took her back, began to rock her softly. Luke put his arm around Eli's shoulders, and the four of them stood there in the warm spring light, a family forged in snow and fire, proven through adversity, unshakable in their love for each other. This was home. This was happiness. This was everything that mattered, everything worth fighting for, everything that made life worth living. And it had all started with one man who chose to stop in a blizzard, who chose kindness over convenience, who proved that sometimes the simplest acts of human decency can change not just one life but many, rippling outward like water touching water, creating waves that would never fully cease. The end was just another beginning, and Luke Carter was finally, completely, joyfully home.